Good morning. In the interest of time, Leader Pelosi is en route. When she gets here, obviously, we'll allow her to give her comments. What we are here this morning is to talk about the sharing of the Congressional Task Force on Election Security report. On background, in January 2017, ODNI confirmed our fears that the Russian government had the U.S. in its crosshairs in 2016 and targeted state voting systems in an attempt to interfere in our elections. Regardless of what President Trump believes, there's no disagreement among security experts that Russia carried out a cyber-enabled influence campaign to meddle in our democratic process. Late last year, Trump's own Attorney General recognized the ongoing threat of Russian interference in future elections. Last month, Trump's hand-picked CIA director said that he continues to be concerned about election interference, not only about the Russians, but also about others' efforts as well. We have many foes who want to undermine Western democracy. Yesterday, we confirmed his concerns and Russia's activities targeting our 2018 elections. And finally, last week, Trump's Secretary of State candidly admitted that we are no better prepared to stop Russia than we were in 2016. Time is short. Our 2018 and 2020 elections are just around the corner. So Democrats chose to act. At no time in this process did a single Republican approach us asking to help us. This task force held a series of public forums and briefings with election security officials, current and former U.S. officials from DHS and Election Assistance Commission, and the top election officials from states like Rhode Island and Virginia. Neither of our committees has held a single hearing on this issue. It hasn't captured the attention of the Republican appropriators either, and Speaker Ryan seems content to ignore it. And now our leader is here. I will defer to her for comments at this time.
I could go at the end.
Oh, okay. Well, then my co-chair of the task force, Congressman Brady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your leadership on this issue and for your work on this report. The first primary election of 2018 is March 6th, only 20 days away, and the general election will take place in less than 9 months. We do not have a minute to waste. We have heard from cybersecurity experts and computer scientists, and the takeaway message is clear. Congress must act. Our first recommendation is that Congress provide federal funds to help states upgrade and maintain their technology infrastructure. Let's start with the facts. There is no doubt that Russia interfered in the 2016 election and targeted 21 states' voting systems. We also know that Russia hackers successfully breached Illinois' voter registration database and attempted to alter or delete records. If they had been successful in Illinois, election day would have been filled with chaos, public confidence, and our democracy would be undermined. We have heard over and over again from state officials that they know what needs to be done, secure their IT infrastructure, but they need money. States need money to be able to hire technology staff and provide cybersecurity training to all state and local elected officials as well as poll workers. States also need money to upgrade their outdated voter registration database. In at least 41 states, databases are at least 10 years old, and threats have been involved significantly since then. The federal government must help states respond to this national security threat by providing the necessary funds. When a foreign nation meddles in our democracy, it is an attack on our nation that calls for swift, bipartisan response. I would now like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressman Richmond.
Thank you, Ranking Member Brady. Let me first just thank the Speaker for this initiative and thank both Ranking Member Brady and Thompson for how thoughtful and methodical this process has been and why I have such confidence in this report. While this report has a lot of recommendations that my colleagues have discussed and more will discuss when I'm finished, I just want to take a moment to highlight two aspects of it. The first is the importance of the designating election systems as critical infrastructure. This designation is not just words, it comes with actions. Making the protection of our election systems a priority for Department of Homeland Security means that the department's efforts and resources can be dedicated to this important task. That's why it was one of the first things that I asked then Secretary Kelly in the first hearing in front of our committee last year, and why I continue to push the department to make this work and support for our state elections efforts a priority. Right now, the federal government should be providing all the support we can to our state and local governments. We need to give the federal government the resources it needs to be full partner and supporter of our local governments who are on the front line in the fight to secure our systems. This includes funding the Election Assistance Commission to a level that is equal to its importance, and it needs to confirm a fourth commissioner so that the agency can continue to serve its important resource. This should be a priority for both the administration and Congress. We in Congress are here because of free and fair elections, and we know the importance of people's trust in our election system. And if any of my colleagues in Congress need any more encouragement to take action, they should know just one thing: the election they save may just be their own. With that, I will introduce from my colleague from California, the very thoughtful and intelligent Zoe Lofgren.
Thanks very much. I was pleased to be a part of this effort to outline what we need to do to secure our elections this year and beyond. Now, as was been said by our intelligence agencies, there is two efforts going on. One, an information warfare effort, and two, concern about the mechanics of the election itself. We've focused on the mechanics of the election threat. We know that following the debacle in 2000 of the hanging chads, we provided $3 billion to states and localities to upgrade their voting systems. Those systems are now old. Many of them are running obsolete software, Windows 2000 or XP, that are not even supported. And in July, this last July at DEF CON, we saw white hat hackers break into these systems and alter them in a short period of time. So we know that we have work to do. Here's what we need to do. We need to help our partners in state and local government upgrade so that they cannot be hacked. And ultimately, we need this. We need a paper ballot that can be scanned and counted in that way, but that can also be audited and, if necessary, recounted. We need to help our partners, and there's nothing more sacred, really, than the election. Every American should know that when they cast their ballot, it gets counted. Now I'd like to introduce my friend, Representative Langevin, who has served on the Homeland Security Committee for so long and has specialized in cybersecurity.
Thank you, Zoe, and good morning. First of all, Leader Pelosi, I want to thank you for appointing us to this task force and putting this effort together. I want to thank both Chairman Thompson and Chairman Brady for leading the effort, along with my fellow task force members, Representative Lofgren, Representative Richmond, and Representative Demings. Obviously, elections and Representative Richmond as well, if I didn't say that. Let me also say that elections and election systems are clearly the cornerstone of our democracy. We cannot do enough to make sure that they are strong, secure, and that the voters of this country have absolute confidence that the system works. I'm no stranger to both elections and election systems, having over 3 decades of experience in these fields, both my days in the legislature, serving as chairing a special legislative commission on looking at new voting equipment, and then as Secretary of State in Rhode Island, where we had the oldest voting equipment in the country. I overhauled that system, transitioning the state to optical scan machines using paper ballots. I completely agree with my colleague, Representative Lofgren, that paper ballots are absolutely essential. And as laid out in the report, a paper trail, again, is a crucial component of secure elections. Now, we know, without a shadow of a doubt, along with all of our intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies, that Russia did, in fact, interfere with our 2016 elections, seeking to undermine public confidence in our election system. And to a frightening extent, they succeeded. And clearly for them, this was a low-cost, high-payoff operation in undermining confidence in the system. And despite there being no evidence of direct ballot tampering, millions of Americans now do question whether their votes will be properly counted. And let me make it very clear that the Russians and other adversaries are looking to strike again. So with the 2018 elections just months away, I believe that it is absolutely vital that we act now to restore that trust and address this national security risk. Now, state and local governments must continue to run their own elections. That's the system that was the way it's designed. Now, it's the way it needs to continue to work in the future. But they cannot be expected to confront a sophisticated nation-state like Russia on their own. Now, the task force report and corresponding legislation are great first steps, and I'd like to highlight a few recommendations that we've made. The first is that states conduct risk-limiting post-election audits to ensure the reported vote tallies match the paper trail. Statistically sound audits help restore voter confidence in election results and provide a safety net in case of election tampering. Now, I'm proud that Rhode Island recently passed a law mandating risk-limiting audits, and I'd like to also underscore the need for cybersecurity training of state and local election officials. Rhode Island Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea, who testified before the task force, has pushed for this back home, and I want to thank her for her leadership and invaluable contributions to the task force report. And it's vitally important that election officials on the front lines are well versed in cybersecurity risk mitigation, and the federal government, I believe, must provide them with the resources that they need to be better trained. Lastly, I want to echo what I know what Mr. Richmond has just spoken about, the importance of DHS designating our nation's elections as critical infrastructure, ensuring that state election officials are priority customers for DHS security assistance, and that communications between the department and election officials are protected. So I hope that we can bring home the value of free DHS security scans and risk assessments to our state partners. And again, I want to thank all of my colleagues and everyone who provide their insight, their expertise, and their testimony to the task force and helping to draft this report, particularly the hardworking staff who did yeoman's work in putting this together. So now we must take the next step and actually act swiftly to implement these policies. So thank you, and now it's my pleasure to introduce a former police chief and current member of Congress, the General Lady from Florida, Val Demings.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Representative Langevin, and to our leader, to our co-chairs. Thank you for your very important leadership and time and attention to this issue. 2016 was not the first time that America's faith in the democratic process has been shaken. As a Floridian, I had a front row seat to the constitutional crisis in the 2000 presidential election that cast tremendous doubt on the American tradition of one person, one vote. However, many of my colleagues have worked together to improve our elections through the Help Americans Vote Act. The integrity of our democratic institutions demand that we understand just what happened during the 2016 election and prevent it in the future. In this instance, Russia's relentless efforts to undermine our democracy, exploit our current election vulnerabilities, and weaken our ability to remain a powerful and secure nation reached a new level. As a former law enforcement officer, I know that the creativity of criminals intending to do harm to us is endless. If you install a lock, they learn to pick it. If you install an alarm, they will learn to disable it. Russia and a host of other states have the capability to interfere, and just yesterday, our intelligence community confirmed that they plan to do it again. Right now, this very moment, they are plotting to do it again. The Election Security Act proactively strengthens our election systems by requiring election technology vendors to adopt specific cybersecurity standards that share threats with election and intelligence officials, as well as running pre-election threat assessments to uncover vulnerabilities with enough time to solve them. Nowhere is that more evident than in my home state of Florida, where the voter registration vendor for 58 of 57 counties was targeted in August of 2016. By October, at least 12 county elections officials had received information about it, but it was not until November 1st that all counties were notified of the attempted hacks. To my knowledge, there were no successful breaches in Florida, to my knowledge, but Russia and others will be back with a vengeance. We must be ready. The Election Security Act, with real-time information sharing, cybersecurity standards, pre-election assessments, and all other efforts discussed today, will ensure that we are ready. The Election Security Act also provides the framework to develop a national strategy to counter efforts by hostile nations to undermine democratic institutions. How critical is it to protect our long-standing democratic institutions? We're already seeing sophisticated efforts on social media to push out misinformation, and our allies' experiences provide frightening examples of potential targets like our power grids and methods like ransomware. While some attempt to cast doubts on Russia's intentions or efforts, I'm confident that Americans understand that our institutions mean too much to be mired in partisan divide and too strong to be subverted. Any challenges will be met and must be met, and any enemy, foreign and domestic, will be and must be defeated. While there are many issues that divide us, the integrity of the voting process should not be in question regardless of race, gender, sexual identity, zip code, or income. Every vote counts the same. It is the last true equalizer. And I look forward to continuing the task force work to ensure that no American ever doubts that remains true. And now it is my pleasure to present the Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for your strong leadership. You're giving us the benefit of your Florida experience and your, in terms of the political situation there and the electoral situation there, but also as a former police chief of Orlando County, the city of Orlando, for your direct knowledge of our vulnerability in every way. We all take an oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. I want to congratulate this task force for their leadership. Many of them wear two hats as they come to this table. Oh, let's see who's here. Oh, yesterday. Okay. I have something to say about that. Many of them wear two hats about protecting the American people. The Election Security Task Force has produced a great document and legislation that can act upon the concerns that we have. I want to commend our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Bennie Thompson, who's been a member of the committee since its origin, from day one. So he knows full well the full array of assaults on our homeland security and has studied this issue, advocated for it long before it was broadly in the public domain. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking member also Brady comes with a membership on the Defense Committee, our national. What's the name of your committee? Armed Services Committee. I was trying to think of his subcommittee, but from the Armed Services Committee, understanding that responsibility to protect the security of America, and he does so in terms of our military strength, the strength of our people, but also the strength of our institutions as the ranking member on the House Administration Committee. So the two of them co-chairing this task force gave us great leadership. When we hear Mr. Richmond talk about this, he comes to it not only from the standpoint of Homeland Security, but from the Judiciary Committee. Again, the responsibility of protecting our voting system in yet another arena, and spoke so eloquently about that. Zoe Lofgren has served on Homeland Security, is on the Judiciary Committee, and a senior Democrat, a senior member of the House Administration Committee. So she comes at it from several directions. And Mr. Langevin on the Armed Services Committee, also an expert on cybersecurity on that committee, as well as when he was on the Intelligence Committee. So again, coming to this task force of the joint committees, he brings great expertise. I say this because their experience runs deep. I started with Val Demings, who was our final speaker until I spoke, and her experience to begin with. So these members of Congress have taken a serious interest in this subject over a long period of time. So they were prepared to make judgments as members of this task force about what we need to go forward. It's been over a year since the intelligence community presented its assessment to the world. Last year was January 6th of last year. More than 13 months have gone by, and we haven't seen action taken that would be commensurate. Well, we need full accounting for Russia's attacks on the 2016 election from this administration, too. The president and the House Republicans have done nothing. Now, let's talk about these folks, some of these folks at the table, and some others. Yesterday, FBI Director Wray testified that the president had not directed the FBI to take action to counter Russian interference. Meanwhile, House Administration and Homeland Security committees still have yet to hold a hearing on Russia's meddling in our election. We must hold the president accountable to his oath of office to make protecting our democracy a priority, our democratic system a priority. Let's talk about some others who have spoken on this subject. 2 weeks ago, CIA Director Pompeo warned that he has every expectation, quotation, that Russia will interfere in the 2018 midterm elections. At yesterday's hearing, Worldwide Threats hearing, Director of National Intelligence Coates said the U.S. is under attack. And so that list goes on. There are other statements. Now, the FBI director, I told you what he said, but Coates on another setting said, frankly, the United States is under attack. This is the Director of National Intelligence, Coates. Frankly, the United States is under attack. Russia will pursue even more aggressive cyber attacks with the intent of degrading our democratic values and weakening our alliances. It goes beyond our country. They want to do it other places as well. Secretary of State Tillerson, he had this to say: Russia is already trying to meddle in this year's midterm congressional elections, and I don't know that I would say we are better prepared. Attorney General Sessions on this subject, when asked if the U.S. government is doing enough to combat future Russian aggression, Sessions responded, "Probably not. We're not. The matter is so complex that for most of us, we're not able to fully grasp the technical dangers that are out there." Well, the list goes on and on. The statements reinforce each other. They have refused to take inventory of what our resources are and what they need to be. They have refused to assess what the danger is to our electoral system, while the Intelligence Committee has clearly, by consensus, told them what it would be. They have now a blueprint on how we can proceed presented by this distinguished task force in the form of legislation. Upgrade the systems, put the resources there to do so, reinforce the idea that these are, as several of our presenters have said about the critical infrastructure designation. Mr. Richmond said that earlier, as did our ranking member, Mr. Thompson. This critical infrastructure designation is very important, yet there are some on the other side who are trying to undermine that designation. And it has to be done, again, with resources, with openness, in a bipartisan way, so that the American people have confidence that when they vote, if they are eligible to vote, when they vote, their vote will be counted as cast. That is the sacred privilege that we have, that our country was founded on, that we have had our struggles over time to expand, civil rights movement, women's rights, etc., to make sure that people fought hard for this right to vote. We have to protect it, and we cannot let the Russians laugh about and take joy in the success they had in the last election in disrupting our election as they go forward to do so again, not only in our country, but in other countries. Their goal is to undermine democracy. And by attacking very central pillar of our democracy, our voting system, they have every intention of doing just that. And the technology only gets more and more sophisticated. We know that. Why aren't we doing something about it? I thank this task force for taking us in a direction, providing the leadership to do just that, to help us protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. With that, I'm sure that our task force members would be happy to take any questions you may have. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. Benny, you want to lead?
Yeah, question to you, Congressman Thompson. In a recent interview, a top DHS official told NBC that there was some evidence that Russia did manage to penetrate a few states' voting systems. Have you seen evidence of this? Because there's been some back and forth on what she actually meant.
Well, I think the question is, what do you require? What do you think penetration is? We know that they wanted to tamper and they targeted our systems. The question is, those 20-plus states, we know they were looking at them. Our problem is, because every state has an individual system for election, we're trying to create a national strategy that ultimately says a system should have 1, 2, 3, 4 in order to be effective. Right now, we have no strategy. The testimony you heard yesterday said there's no strategy. We propose a strategy with our legislation. We propose a commission to manage it over time to make sure that we stay current. Florida, Illinois were two states that we know that had issues, but it's still in doubt. One of the problems is there's little pieces of the puzzle, and that coordinated strategy on behalf of our government to defend our systems of how we elect our officials is important. And what we're saying, in the absence of that strategy or one agency responsible, you'll have this hodgepodge of individuals looking at it.
Can I ask you one more question? So one of the things you mentioned in the report is the need for DHS to have more money to assist states. Do you have a number for how much more they need?
Exactly. We have $1 billion to do solely for the issuance of paper ballots, but overall, we're talking about $1.8 billion, which is the total amount. But that's to be spent over a period of time doing various things. We have to do training. We have to test our systems. We have to do the audits. All those things are proposed. Now, we are proposing a $1 per a voter in each state as the cap for what we put in each state. So everyone will get something. We can't run the system, but I say we spent on HAVA about $3.6 billion when we created that. Our challenge now is to put some structure to the investment. HAVA was a good first start. Now what we have is to put the systems in place. We did not get the systems required for the enemy we face now, and that's why we're coming forward with this. This is not a vendor program. We didn't suggest an individual company. We're saying a good election system, in order to protect the integrity of it, must have certain things. And so we're hoping, working with DHS as well as with individual states, we can come up with that.
I remember ahead of the last election, reporting on some Republicans calling for paper ballots, and they were kind of laughed off by members of your party, saying that was an attempt to undermine and keep people away from the polls. What's changed?
I don't know what incident you're referring to, but before I came to Congress, I was chair of the California Democratic Party, and removing obstacles to participation in the election was one of our purposes, whatever the party of the person that we wanted to vote. And a paper ballot has always been a safeguard that most of us, I don't know what you're referencing, but again, a paper ballot has always been to us the sign of integrity in an election, and nothing spoke more eloquently to that than the experience in Florida in 2000.
It's real hard when you talk about pushing people to technology to go back to the paper ballot. But we think for validation purposes, for auditing, there's nothing like the paper ballot. Now, we can count it on a scan or something, but ultimately, if there's a question about the integrity of the ballot and the other thing, there's nothing like the physical document.
What does it say, you guys are in the minority, what does it say that there's no Republicans here? And what are your talks with Republicans?
Well, I hope what Republicans heard yesterday will jumpstart this conversation. Everyone now, with the exception of the White House, acknowledges that the Russians were messing around. We need to make sure that their messing around doesn't compromise our systems of election. And that's what we're proposing to do. We've tried on Homeland, we've tried on other committees to get at least access to what actually happened. We have been unsuccessful. All our hearings for the task force have been open to the public, and we have solicited former secretaries of Homeland Security to testify, members of the Election Assistance Commission, and whatever, and, as well as the Secretary of State from Rhode Island. And we've been transparent in what we've done, but we've also tried to include any Republicans should they want it to come forward, but they haven't.
That would be a good question for you to ask the Republicans. We did, and you see who's up here, but we did.
Well, we've had that conversation before even the last election. The four of us, the four leaders, then it was Harry Reid, Speaker Ryan, and Leader McConnell and I sent a letter to the state, whatever the authority was in the state. I do have a copy of it. Some states, it was Secretary of State. It's a little bit different in different places, but it is, for example, we sent it, this one is addressed to the President of the National Association of State Election Directors. And in it we say the Constitution reserves to the states the responsibility for administering elections. We have to remember that. This is a state function. It is the committee report from the 2002 Help America Vote Act, HAVA, which was referenced by Mr. Thompson. explaining that system has many benefits that must be preserved, but then there's some challenges. And what we say in this letter, the states face a challenge of malefactors that are seeking to use cyber attacks to disrupt the administration of our elections. We urge the states to take full advantage of the robust public and private sector resources available to them to ensure that their networks infrastructure is secure. It goes on, and I can show you a copy of the letter. But that was September 28th, 2016, when we first were finding out about the possible disruptions in the briefings that we had. And we're just saying there are some resources available. When we saw what actually did happen afterward, it's clear. Now, you may not have been here, but a few weeks ago we were here with each of the committees of jurisdiction, whether it's Judiciary Committee, Homeland Security, even the Financial Services Committee because of money laundering, all of the committees of jurisdiction, calling upon the leadership of the House to have hearings, and their chairman to have hearings in this regard. But so far, we have gotten no response in that regard. But hopefully, after the testimony yesterday and the statements that are coming out now, the American people will insist that the Republicans take action. Why is the president saying, I asked Putin and he said no, and that's all right with me? Oh, really? It's not all right with the rest of us who take the oath to protect and defend the Constitution. I just say that this is also part of a bigger issue for us. Build America, build our infrastructure and create good paying jobs, build the physical infrastructure, educate our people, health care, their well-being so that they can participate fully in a healthy economy and the prosperity of our country, and build and support our democratic infrastructure, our electoral system, so that our democracy is strong and it continues to be a model to the world. So this is all part of the strength of America, measured again in the integrity of our elections. You had a question?
To what extent do you think the president's resistance to acknowledging the presence of Russian interference in the 2016 election and our wider electoral infrastructure will hinder or complicate the efforts of this task force?
You know, he's president of the United States. I'm convinced that his job is to protect our country, our system of government. And one of the ways is that system of how we elect our officials. And those individuals under oath yesterday acknowledged that they are bad actors, i.e. Russia, could be some others, but we know Russia is trying to compromise how we do that. I would hope at some point the president accepts the challenge to do that. These individuals, while they've been appointed by him, they're also American citizens. And I think the testimony you heard from them yesterday reflect a greater interest in our system of government than who appointed me to the position.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.